Hello, my name is Brian Lewis. I'm an instructor at JTNS. This month we're going to talk about fire safety at home and at work. But before we get started, I'd like for you to pause the video and talk about any near misses or accidents you may have had in the previous month. Once you finish that discussion, go ahead and press play and we'll continue. Alright, I hope you've had a fruitful discussion. As I said before, we're going to talk about fire safety at work and at home. We try to do this topic yearly at JTNS, and we'll go over some statistics here in a little bit to show you why. But it's really important that we discuss these issues. Make sure that you're prepared both at work and at home. We don't want to lose anyone in a tragic needless death or any kind of tragic needless injuries as well. So having said that, we'll go ahead and get started with fire safety at work and at home. As we get started, we want to talk about some statistics just to make sure everybody understands where we're starting at and what we're having to deal with. About 70% of all the structural fires occur in the home, and about 80% of all fire deaths occur in the home. A quarter of all home fires happen while people are asleep, basically from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And so keep that in mind. We want to avoid these needless deaths, injuries, etc. When we're at home with our families where we feel safe. Workplace fires. There are three basic things that are needed for a fire to exist. Now, fire's a chemical reaction, and for that reaction to occur, you need a fuel, you need some heat or an ignition source. Some people break those into two separate things, and you need oxygen. So, when you have these things put together, you can have a fire. So, what's the most common cause of fire in the industrial premises? Not at home, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., but at work and industrial settings, and that's just arson. I hate to say it, it's an ugly truth that people would set fire to buildings, but it is true. What do you think is the average maximum time allowed for fire evacuation? And that is 2 minutes. Now, 2 minutes is not a lot of time. In fact, 2 minutes goes by really quick, extremely quick, when you're talking about trying to get out of a burning building. It doesn't matter if it's at work or at home, especially when you think about home fires that happen between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. and what it takes to get yourself and your family from a burning house. It's pretty daunting to get out in 2 minutes, and it's daunting to get out in 2 minutes when you're talking about an industrial facility. Now, a lot of us work out in the field, and so you don't have a building, but you may have a vehicle you have to think about. So keep those things in mind. That's why it's important to move as quickly as you can and not worry too much about personal effects. Just leave those behind. It's more important that you live. We can replace stuff. We can't replace people. Home fires, wood stoves cause over 9,000 house fires a year. Nearly 1,000 lives are lost from fires that start in bedrooms. 25,000 people are injured in those house fires. And 1/5 or 20% of all fires that injure someone are cooking fires. I've known several people that have had grease catch fire in a frying pan or something similar to that. You need to be prepared for that. There again, what causes a fire? Fuel, oxygen, and heat or an ignition source. And so when you're talking about cooking, you're using heat. There's oxygen in the air, and the fuel, grease or some other kind of fuel. Smoke alarms are great. Nearly 2/3 of all fire deaths happen in home where there is not a working fire alarm. Okay, so if you don't have a fire alarm, a working fire alarm that the battery works, you have a problem. And people die from smoke inhalation at a much greater clip than you would imagine. and not from flames. I know a lot of people have a fear of burning to death, but I think it's much more likely that you're going to die from smoke inhalation instead of burning in a fire or the flames. So the fire displaces oxygen, it uses the oxygen for the chemical reaction, and what ends up happening is you have smoke and you have inhalation issues, and most people succumb to that before the flames ever get to them. In fires considered large enough to activate a smoke alarm, hardwired alarms operated 93% of the time, while battery operated units only operated roughly 80% of the time. It's important once a year to go around and change the batteries in your smoke alarms. Now, most new buildings, most new homes have hardwired in smoke alarms, but they also have battery backup. That's a great thing. You still need to go by once a year and change out the batteries. At my house, we do it around New Year's. You may do it around some other kind of holiday or some other birthday or some other important date in your life. It really doesn't matter what date you choose, as long as it's a date that you remember. This is the time that I go around, change your batteries out in the smoke alarms, make sure they're working properly, make sure they protect you and your family. Goes true at work. At work, we need to go through and check our emergency lighting. We need to have tests on our smoke alarms, make sure they're in good shape. If you're out in the field, need to have honest discussions with each and every person on the crew about, hey, this is what we're going to do in the case of a fire. This is what we're going to do in case of some other bad event happening that we need to plan for. Need to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're going to end up in trouble. We don't want that. For the best protection, as I said, a combination alarm is recommended. Now, some alarms, what they do is they go off if there's smoke. Other alarms sense carbon monoxide, and it's nice to have both. It's nice to have both. Both a carbon monoxide alarm as well as a smoke alarm can go a long way to making sure you and your family make it out alive. Testing and having multiple alarms in the workplace, same thing. How a fire works: you have to have enough oxygen to sustain the combustion. You have to have some sort of fuel, combustible, flammable material. A lot of times those are vapors and or gases, but can be solids. And you have to have enough heat to raise the material to its ignition temperature. And what happens is you have a fire. So what happens a lot of time, people do not realize that they have completed the fire triangle, but it's important. It's important to realize that if you take one or two legs away from the fire triangle, you will disrupt and cause the fire to go out. So disrupting the fire and having it go out is important. Some important things that we need to do is identify hazards. Now, in the home, when we identify hazards that can create fires, we're talking about cooking equipment. We're talking about space heaters. Now, those can be an issue as well in the workplace. Wood stove and fireplaces that are not properly maintained, including the chimneys, that's important. Important that we maintain those things. Unsafe holiday decorations. Make sure all of your holiday decorations that use power are UL listed, UL approved. Make sure that they are appropriate. Make sure you have not overloading any particular circuit. Inspect frayed or kinked wires. There again, at work, there is a rule that we inspect flexible cords before we plug them in. I'm not sure how often that happens, but it should happen every time before you plug in an extension cord or some other flexible cord, that you inspect it, make sure that it's in good working order. Any kind of unattended candles, a lot of times during the holidays, people like to have certain smells, and that's great. It reminds us of holidays past and warm fuzzy feelings. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to have an open flame, you need to pay attention to where it's at. and you need to have a process by which you make sure it's extinguished before you go to bed. Remember, home fires typically happen between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. That is the time frame that we need to concentrate on to make sure nothing bad happens in our homes. Overloaded electrical circuits, it's easy to do around the holidays. We start plugging things in. We like pretty lights, we like music and all kinds of sounds. It's important to realize most of our circuits in our homes are 15 amp circuits. And we need to make sure we do not exceed 15 amps. I would encourage you not to match the 15 amp. If you have a breaker that continually flips or a fuse that continually blows, you're overloading the circuit. You need to go back and think about what you have plugged into that circuit and how you can reduce the load on that circuit. Heat is one of the things that we have to take care of. One of the things we have to look at when we're looking at fire hazards. Anything that creates heat is going to have potential for a fire hazard. Some prevention methods. We want to keep the furnace in good working order. There again, if you have a propane or a natural gas furnace, you want to make sure you maintain that in a good way. You want to use a fireplace screen. Keep those hot coals and everything else where it needs to be, right? Don't want a lot of stuff popping out of that fire. Proper ventilation for heaters and small appliances. Use the correct size fuses. Don't overcome or defeat the fuses or your breakers by doing any kind of modification to the boxes. Don't smoke in bed. I hate to say it. There's a lot of people fall asleep smoking in bed or on the couch or some other material that burns, and before you know it, they're on fire. Do not use worn out electrical wiring. Clear refuse away. The less clutter means less fuel for fire. Now this is almost a 2-for-1 when you get refuse out of the way. We talk about housekeeping a lot when we talk about work. Having a place to walk, having a place to move. Same thing at home. Most of this refuse, not only does it cause problems in exiting a building, whether it's at work or at home, but most of it is combustible or flammable, meaning it can catch fire and eliminate a door that you can use to get out of the building. So we don't want that. We want to be able to use our fire exits, and we want to be able to escape from our houses unencumbered, without anything in our way, right? Properly store combustibles. Now this can go a lot of ways. We have flammable materials typically both at work and home. We have chemicals that can be oxidizers, which liberate or create oxygen, and you do not want to store those in close proximity of flammable liquids, aerosols, and solids, things like that. You want to have any kind of oxidizing chemical separated from flammable materials, either by walls or by distance. We want to make sure that it's not an issue that we're going to create a greater hazard by having oxidizers and flammables stored together. So make your home safe, make your work safe, install smoke detectors, make sure the fire alarms work at work, keep batteries changed, have an evacuation plan for work and home. Now at home you're going to have, a lot of people will have small children or teenagers, and you're going to have to take extra time with teenagers and small children to make sure they understand what they need to do in the event of a fire. Make sure anyone that's in your home, especially babysitters that sit with your children, make sure they understand the plan. Make sure everyone's educated, just like work. We have an emergency action plan for fire, tornadoes, and other kinds of potentially natural disasters or events that can happen. Same thing at the house. If you have a 2-story house, you have to have a plan to get away from that second story. So do some research on that. Make sure you've got what you need and you're taking care of your business in the unfortunate event you have a home fire. Make your home fire safe. Don't store combustible materials too close to the heater, water, or any other source of ignition. Get rid of old paint, lumber, junk. Once again, housekeeping can be a big deal. It is a big deal and can be a big deal. Make sure that you are not leaving fuel behind and that you have a way to escape. Something we don't talk about a lot, but the lint trap in your dryer. Lint is an exceptionally flammable material and creates a lot of fires. You have a lot of heat from some of these dryers, particularly gas-powered dryers. Electrical dryers create enough heat to cause fire also, but gas clothes dryers do burn really hot or create a lot of heat. So you will make sure that you pay attention to that. Of course, plastic melts. Some different plastics melt at different temperatures, obviously, but you want to make sure you have a metal vent pipe if at all possible. We've already talked about the escape plan. According to the NFPA, only 1/3 of Americans have both developed and practice a home fire escape plan. I'm telling you, it only takes about 10 or 15 minutes to have an honest, good, productive discussion with the people in your house about what we're going to do in case there's a fire and how to get out. It's worth having. It's worth having in the holiday season when we put high demands on our electrical circuits in our home, and unfortunately, if you pay attention to the news, we always hear about some tragedy this time of year, especially in the winter months, people overloading circuits or creating fire hazards. We don't want to be a part of that tragic scenario. We want to avoid that as much as we can. Almost 75% of Americans do not have an escape plan, and more than half never practice it. Give your family an edge. Give yourself an edge. Don't be a tragic story. Be a successful story. By success, that you avoid any kind of tragic outcomes. How do we survive a fire? Well, you don't get trapped. Cover your mouth and nose with a damp cloth if you can, when possible. Keep low to the floor. Don't hide. Be determined to survive. If your clothes catch fire, stop, drop, and roll. Once you're out of the building, do not go back in. Now, this is important about not getting trapped, and it's also important to keep low to the floor as well as to cover your mouth. It's important that you encourage children not to hide, even though that it's a very stressful situation and may cause them a great amount of fear. It's also really important that you are just determined to survive. I cannot overemphasize that. Just cannot overemphasize that. People who survive are typically unwilling to give up in any circumstance. And you have to have that attitude. To ensure that you survive any kind of fire, whether it's at work or at home, or really any kind of potentially hazardous event that's going to potentially have life and limb on the line. Emergency action plan, you want to report emergencies. You want to call 911 as quickly as you can. You want to know what the alarm sounds like. You want to know where the primary exit from a building is. A lot of times at work, we have these plans put up on the walls. They're mounted on the walls. They tell you exactly where you are, where you need to go. You need to understand where you need to meet. Let me point out, particularly in this frame that we're looking at, they talk about flagpoles, signs, and mailboxes. We don't want to pick trees, and we don't want to pick things that can easily be cut down or moved. So you want to pick permanent type structures where you're going to meet and have a roll call. That's really important. That's why we need to reevaluate these plans anytime there's a change, or at least yearly, or anytime there's a change. You want to reevaluate this plan and make sure that it's up to date. How do we report missing persons? We have a roll call. We start talking to people. When the fire department comes upon site and they're responding to this emergency, one person in charge needs to have this information, needs to have it available, needs to have a very clear, honest discussion with the fire department. Let people know what's going on. Let them know what to expect. Fighting a fire. Well, there's a couple, or more than a couple of rules we want to adhere to or go by when we decide if and when we're going to fight a fire. Is it bigger than a waste paper bin? If it is, you probably do not want to fight the fire. One fire extinguisher is not enough to extinguish the fire. You probably do not want to fight the fire. If smoke is affecting your breathing, you do not want to fight the fire. There again, we mentioned earlier, a great many people die in fires from smoke inhalation. It's not the fire itself, it's the smoke produced by the fire. If you cannot see your way out, you do not want to fight the fire. What we want to do is place a priority on getting out of the building, avoiding the fire and avoiding the smoke. So if you cannot see the way out, that's not the time to fight the fire, that's the time to find an exit. So we want to make sure we have our priorities correct. If gas cylinders or chemicals are involved, we do not want to mess with that. If those gas cylinders explode or if the chemicals can create greater combustion hazards, we want to leave and we want to get out of the way as quickly as we can. Those gas cylinders can be so dangerous when they explode, and we just don't want to be around them. If your efforts are not reducing the size of the fire, in other words, the fire grows. No matter what you do, if the fire grows, it is time to leave. So keep those things in mind. We never want the fire between us and the exit. We always want to maintain an exit for our own selves if you're using a fire extinguisher. So the fire should never be between you and the exit. Keep those things in mind. As we talk about classes of fires, most of the fire extinguishers we have at work, and hopefully if you have one at home, they are ABC fire extinguishers. So Class A fires are burning materials typically made out of wood, paper, and plastics. Flammable liquids, gasolines, and solvents tend to be Class B fires, and Class C fires tend to be electrical fires. Metals such as aluminum dust, particular Class D fires. The best way to remember this, A class fires produce ash. B class fires are typically boiling flammable liquids. Class C fires are electrical circuits, and Class D fires are flammable metal dust. Flammable metal dust. That's the best way I know of to remember what class of fire. Like I said, most of our fire extinguishers at home as well as at work are ABC class fire extinguishers. So that's important. If you do have the potential for metal dust, it's important that you have a Class D fire extinguisher available. Fire extinguishers, best on Class B and C fires, safe to use on any type of fire, use on fires involving electricity, and extinguishes by both reducing the oxygen levels and cooling the fuel. Remember, if we go back to our fire triangle, one leg is fuel, one leg is heat, and one leg is oxygen. So if we use these BC fires or ABC fire extinguishers correctly, they're going to do two things. One, they're going to displace the oxygen. When we remove oxygen, we cut out that leg of the triangle. The second thing they do is they tend to cool down the fuel source, and so you knock out that leg of the fire triangle. So you remove the oxygen, you cool down the fuel source, and what you have is you put the fire out if you know how to properly use the fire extinguisher. Now, how do we properly use the fire extinguishers? We use the pass system. The pass system. So keep this in mind. You want to pull the ring. You want to aim the nozzle. You want to squeeze the handle, and you want to sweep the nozzle back and forth at the base. Let me repeat that. At the base of the fire. By squeezing and sweeping at the base of the fire, you are displacing the oxygen and you are cooling down the fuel source. We're knocking out two legs of the fire triangle. So the past system where we pull the ring, aim the nozzle, squeeze the handle, and sweep the nozzle back and forth at the base of the fire, we can put the fire out. So make sure you use a fire extinguisher correctly, right? Hopefully this has been informative. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact your JTNS instructor or call any representative of JTNS. Of course, we're going to do our very best to answer your question, whatever your question may be. Of course, we are not the keepers of all knowledge that there is, so you're probably going to have a few questions asked of us that we don't know the answer to, but we will research those answers and get back to you with the question or the answer to the question that you've had. So once again, I appreciate your time, appreciate your attention, and appreciate you paying attention. From the staff at JTNS, please have a safe and joyful holiday season. Enjoy yourselves with your friends. Enjoy your time with your family, and be safe. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.